I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do a quick and rather shame-filled Friday Reads video for Friday, September 28th, 2018. If you watched my last Friday Reads video, you'll know that I made a promise about what I hope to get accomplished over the weekend, and I did not get it accomplished for a pretty silly reason. On Saturday, I took a fair bit of time to do some writing, and I hit more of a snag than I thought I would, and it put me in quite a bit of a funk. I did spend a lot of the day on Saturday working on it, to be fair to myself, more than I thought I would. I thought it would be a quicker day. And I was in a funk, and so I basically took Sunday off from a lot of things, and I did not do any writing or reading. I just allowed it to accumulate, and that would have been a great day to get in significant reading, because then other than that, of course, I was working, and that didn't leave as much time for reading afterwards. So I intended to be long done with this book, A Palace of Pearls, The Stories of Rabbi Nachman of BRATSLAV by Howard Schwartz, but instead I am on page 194, about halfway through, I guess, and I don't know, I am enjoying this this book. It's of folk tales and such that Rabbi Nachman told his disciples. He was a Rebbe in the late 18th century, early 19th century in the Ukraine, basically the Russian Empire. And I don't know, I guess, I mean, I'm finding them intriguing. I don't know, there's such a weird dissonance, especially about the ones that read so much like the fairy tales of, that seem like standard European medieval fairy tales of lost princesses and so forth, but that his inspiration is so often about Jewish messianism and the Shekinah, which is sort of the female aspect of God, and the sort of idea of Judaism's exile from the Holy Land and just being adrift in the world and trying to put together the pieces of life again when, you know, things are in shards. So it's sort of like the themes for a lot of these stories are more metaphysical than anything else. And then there are other stories that have much more Jewish overt themes and are more allegorical of biblical stories, and it's all very interesting. I don't know, maybe I do think Schwartz is overplaying it a little about the greatness of the stories. Maybe I saw myself as someone who was fascinated by fairy tales, but in reading so many of them, there's such a facile writing style to them after a while that Schwartz insisting that this is all Kafka-esque kind of makes me arch my eyebrow a little bit. And frankly, I shouldn't get too cocky with that myself, because another shame alert, I haven't read any Kafka. But I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect there, or maybe it's just too much of the same thing over and over, because I feel like I'm invested, but I was also slowing down a bit. But that's not really the reason why I put this book aside. I guess it was part of it, like I thought maybe I needed a little bit of a break. But I also moved on to He, She, It by Marge Piercy because it was due at the library, and it was one of those situations where I couldn't renew my holds because somebody else wanted it. So now I am racing against the clock and trying to finish this one quickly. And I am on page 124, maybe like 1/3 or 1/4 of the way through. So this is a Jewish cyberpunk novel, which basically I guess is a Jewish dystopia. It was written in the early 90s, so maybe instead of just outright saying dystopia, they focus on other elements, like how technological the world is, and that it's sort of run by corporations to a large extent. This is kind of a scary world in the terms of what happens when corporations are treated like people, perhaps. But more than that, I think it's an allegory for the tale of the golem, which is really fascinating. I mean, there's a subplot in this future story that is entirely about the creation of the golem in Prague in the medieval times, which and then it's relating that to the characters in this book creating a cyborg with human emotions, and it's in a world where that's considered a big no-no. You do not make robots who look human, and also certainly there's robots who act human. But the reasons why they're making this humanoid robot are kind of similar to the reasons why the golem was made traditionally, and I find that really fascinating and lovely, because the golem is one of the creatures I think in non-Jewish discourse now has turned into another generic monster, and I think I've heard of some recent fantasies where like the golem is, you know, just the monster du jour, and it's completely divorced from its Jewish ancestry, and it's always made me a little bit defensive. But this one like takes it right back, you know, to the actual origins of the story, which was, you know, medieval Prague, and it brings it to the anti-Semitic history that, you know, the rabbi and his disciples who made the golem were very much responding to the virulent anti-Semitism of the time, and the violence that was constantly inflicted on the Jews. And Piercy is telling that in a lot of detail. And then also it brings it back to Kabbalistic influences and so forth. So it is interesting to read this sort of in conjunction with the NACHMAN story, because there's some philosophical bents that are very similar. But yeah, so I really like that, and I also like the futuristic parts. It's fascinating because obviously Piercy wrote this several decades back, and was imagining a future. Some of it has now come to pass, like one of the characters, Malko, was born in 1987, so close to my age, and had a very different past than I did because of all because she veered off into a different future. But there are parts of this I think that are interesting in what she's talking about. You know, like the extreme interface with humans and technology, and how that's become a much bigger deal that has come to pass. Or there's a section in here about how the most secure form of transmitting information is through these message bots that are can only give you messages by DNA, and that you know, the electronic versions can be subject to hacking, and of course that's something that's come up a lot recently in our own time, so that was interesting. And it's a very descriptive world, very depressing in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of tragedy. I think one thing Piercy had to do for the Jewish aspect is she had to wipe Israel off the map, because Jews had to be in exile again for it to correlate to the golem story. And a lot of the action takes place in the free town of Tikva, which is surrounded by these corporate town areas that tend to be xenophobic and uniform, and they sort of barely tolerate these free towns that have, you know, religious minorities and sexual deviations, which I think Piercy's kind of hinting at, like homosexuality and things like that. I mean, I guess it's one of those things too where in the 90s people were definitely talking about homosexuality, and it's different today, but she's kind of you know, realizing that to some degree in the book. I don't know, I'm just, you know, I'm being fascinated by that. I'm also liking the story, which follows this woman Shira, who loses her son in one of those corporations or people battles, like, you know, the cruelty of the system when it's so inhuman, and then she has nothing left, and she goes back home to her free town to help an old neighbor and friend work on this cyborg, and so she is the creator of the, you know, futuristic golem, and it's a bit of a morality tale about this creature. Does this creature have morality? He's very strong, he can kill people easily, He doesn't have the ethical dilemmas that we often do, although he's curious about them. And so there's an interesting moral questioning element, and so I really am enjoying this one. I think it just comes down to having the time to read it and to finish it, and if I'm going to be kind of nitpicky about something, I do not like these mass market paperbacks. I just find them difficult to flip through, but that's neither here nor there in the grand scheme of things. And finally, I'm listening to the audiobook of the Yiddish Policemen's Union by Michael Chabon. I'm about 4 discs into 11 discs. I don't have the audiobook with me, but I still have the book. And this is so much defined, I think, by its police procedural gestalt about it's taking place in an alternative, I think it's 1980s really, where in this world again, Israel has been destroyed, like pretty quickly after its creation it was destroyed, which makes me think so much about how, you know, at first I like rail against that, like that never could have happened, but actually it could have. I mean, people talk about how, even in the book, I don't know why Chabon goes on a tear about how shocking it was that Israel was destroyed by her neighbors, when it seems like that was really a precipice, a tightrope that was walked in 1948 about whether or not you know, such a small fledgling nation could survive. So, and considering that Israel has been so little in Jewish hands throughout history, that was, you know, antiquity and then 1948, it's not that shocking in a way. I mean, it was sort of like a blink of an eye of luck. But anyway, so because Israel was destroyed and other, you know, alternative history was in play, the Jews were able to create a Yiddish-centric, because it's sort of Holocaust refugee-centric for the most part, and pogrom refugee-centric haven in Alaska. And one thing I remember wondering, when I read another dystopia that sort of took a part of America and said, well, now this is a haven for the Jews, in that book, it just became a suburb of America, except that it was religiously reserved for Jews, and I'm like, that goes against the First Amendment. What's going on here? How is Chabon going to deal with that? And he deals with that with making Sitka in Alaska not Alaska. It's its own sort of place, but it's sort of like a territory of the U.S. in a certain degree, kind of like Puerto Rico or something. And in the book, one of the major backstory ideas is that Sitka is going to revert to Alaska and stop being this, you know, Jewish-centric ethnic place, and it's going to go back to being American. And it's something that the characters in the novel have to deal with. Everyone on the police force is about to get laid off for the most part, and they're trying to wrap up some cases, and the story opens with this murder in a seedy hotel where the stereotypical archetypal male detective, divorced and filthy and cynical, is living. And it's a book, I think, you know, the aesthetic of it is so sort of overwhelming. It's such a physical aesthetic of the cynical police procedural that I actually am finding it more engaging than I thought I would. I was surprised by that, but it's not my usual milieu, and it's not very interior monologue or interior characterization heavy. It's the main drive of it is this I don't know, you know, it seems like the main character stepped out of a 40s noir movie, you know, so that sort of narrative is a main drive, and then the Jewish backstory issues of what would make this Yiddish-centric culture and what it means for it to be going away, and what it means to have, it's similar to, you know, to Israel, because it is still a Jewish state basically, so we have these different sects. Well, I mean, it's a very cynical book that it deals with Jewish crime, really, but that's just sort of normal to, you know, any society, and because Chabon's focusing on a police force and a murder mystery. And then we also have the Hasids, the Black Hats, and their quest for messianism. To, again, everything I'm reading seems to be going on certain themes. And so I'm following the murder mystery, and I'm liking the sort of the Yiddish Jewish elements. It's not my usual sort of story. Again, it's not as introspective as I usually like fiction to be, but I guess in terms of American Jewish male writers, I tend to find some of them relatively insufferable, and I guess I can't put Chabon completely over in the insufferable camp. It's different than what I'd usually like to read, but I think it's more interesting than I would have thought from my usual reaction to the murder mystery police procedural stuff. It's just a matter of having the time to finish the audiobook. So I figured I'd end now with doing a quick little jaunt into what I hope to read next, which I'm sure is going to end up being October reading. This is my third Jewish-centric sci-fi book that I wanted to read for Sci-Fi September, and the title always makes me cackle in glee. This is a book of short stories called Jews vs. Aliens. It's edited by Lavie, Tidhar, and Rebecca Levene. And I just love it. I just want to say, take me to your Rebbe. This is the book written for me. It's the closest I'll get to Jews in space. Anyway, I'll read from the back. Lavie, Tidhar, and Rebecca Levene present 10 brand new stories from the lighthearted to the profound, with authors ranging from Orange Prize winner Naomi Alderman, and now of course also Women's Prize winner Naomi Alderman, to Big Bang Theory writer-producer Eric Kaplan, asking the eternal question, what happens when aliens arrive only to encounter Jews? Oh, I do think I'm going to love this one, and I kind of hope it actually goes a little faster because it is shorter. And finally, this has also been on my docket for a while. It's my most anticipated science fiction release of the year. This is Record of a Spaceborn Feud by Becky Chambers. So I would really love to actually get this off of my TBR. I'm very excited for this book. I feel like it might be my favorite in the Wayfarer series because I love the idea of exploring a space station and what it means for humans to live on a space station long after that space station has left Earth. And Chambers always writes about individual characters and their individual stories, and I think that's why a lot of literary people who don't read a lot of science fiction talk a lot about Becky Chambers in these novels. So it's sort of a bridge to that, but I love science fiction as it is, but I find this whole series very warm and fuzzy, and I feel like this is going to fit the bill for that. So that about covers it for me. I think this is going to be my last Friday reads for a while, because I have been having trouble keeping up with my reading in them, as you can see, and I'm hoping to slow down a little bit on my reading next month too, because my reading projects have been spilling over from month to month, and I don't necessarily want that to happen from October to November when NaNoWriMo starts, and I then have to focus on 50,000 words of a story. So I will do a wrap-up in October and other videos in October as well. Like, I want to do some extended Sci-Fi September videos perhaps, because I didn't do a lot of Sci-Fi September videos this month, so why not continue it? I think it'll be a nice break for me, and hopefully let me read without sort of that strange encumbrance of this exterior goal of wanting to update people week by week on what I'm reading. But I will be back to talk about all of these books, either here or in my literary newsletter that I do monthly on my blog. And I'll also be back on Sunday to do my quarterly wrap-up for my writing goals, speaking of a whole other ball of angst, but also some good stuff, hopefully, to report. I'll be back. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everyone. Happy reading, and I'll see you next time.